ඵලදායී ලෙස සිදු කිරීමට රජයට සහාය විය හැක්කේ කෙසේද?
Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everyone joining us on this live stream from wherever you are in the world. Unfortunately, because of the events that are happening and unfolding in Sri Lanka right now, we're unable to actually meet and do this in person. So thanks to technology, we now have the access and that being said, I have to apologize for the delay that we experienced early on because we were trying to shoot the videos and things like that. Welcome. This press conference precludes a very national policy on the protection and conservation of environmentally sensitive areas around the country. This initiative is driven by the Ministry of Environment in collaboration with the Ministry of Wildlife and Forest Conservation, the Ministry of Lands, and the Ministry of Policy, who unfortunately cannot be represented here today. There are certain portions of land in Sri Lanka that is protected by various ordinances, policies, laws, some sectoral policies that protect certain areas of land. But this national policy, which is due to be implemented this year and currently being drafted for the presentation to the Cabinet of Ministers, is going to have purview over the entire country. Sri Lanka as a whole will finally have a national environment policy. Far be it for me to talk about this. We have an esteemed panel of guests that I'm more than privileged to introduce to you today. For starters, we have Dr. Anil Jasinga, Secretary to the Ministry of Environment. We have Mr. R. Ranawaka, Secretary to the Ministry of Lands. We have Mr. Somaratna Vidanapatirane, Secretary to the Ministry of Wildlife and Forest Conservation. We have Mr. Robert Yukam, the President Representative of the United Nations Development Programme. And then we have Professor Sewandi Jayakodi, Senior Lecturer of the Wayamba University. We're going to hear from all our panelists as the program goes on, and we will end with a time of questions and answers for our learned guests. So to help move this along, I would urge you to please type out or write out your questions. You can either send it directly to DGI Zoom, who is the host of the Zoom call that you're currently logged into. Or if you are watching on Facebook Live, you can write out or type out your questions as a chat under the comment section of the video, and we will take it up for it to be answered by our learned panelists. For now, however, I would like to kick off proceedings by inviting Dr. Anil Jasinga, who is the Secretary to the Ministry of Environment, who will announce the environmentally sensitive area policy that is due to be drafted this year. Dr. Anil, the floor is all yours.
Thank you very much. Good morning to everybody. Mr. Ranawaka, Secretary of Land Ministry. Then Mr. Somaratna, the Secretary of the Ministry of Wildlife and Forests. Mr. Robert Yukam, the resident representative of UNDP. Professor Sewandi. And the officials from Ministry of Environment and other ministries, the other stakeholders of this entire work, and the media personnel, ladies and gentlemen. Now, as we all know, we don't have to reiterate. As we all know, Sri Lanka is considered to be a hotspot in biodiversity and also one of the richest countries in species abundance. So we have been always talking about the value of managing environment, managing natural resources, its biodiversity, that it is vital for the country. But we could see that depletion of natural resources and degradation has been happening over decades, if you take. Now, the reasons for this kind of degradation could be attributed due to population pressure, increasing demand for natural resources due to the needs and the population pressure, and then absence of environmentally sensitive development planning practices, environment pollution on other fronts, illegal trade. So there are just, I just named few of major ways that the environment is being degraded and polluted. So historically in Sri Lanka, there are certain environmentally sensitive areas where the areas and features have been protected in Sri Lanka under several policy, legal, institutional frameworks in different forms. Now, they can be area-based, they can be species-based, or they can be feature-based. For example, under forest the ordinance, forests, the protected forests, and then we have, for example, national parks under wildlife ordinance, and then we have declared environment protected areas under National Environment Act. So if you put them together, the area considered to be about 1/4 of the geographical area of Sri Lanka. But when it comes to the environment sensitive areas, there are a lot of environment sensitive areas outside the protected area that I mentioned. So those areas are without conservation or management framework most of the time. So, but if you take these environment sensitive areas, they are not only environmentally and ecologically important, they are important socially, they are important economically as well. So this is what we have to understand. This is what we have sometimes failed to understand. And also these environmental sensitive areas are important for resilience of communities, for long-term sustainable development of communities. Therefore, as I told earlier, the issues are degradation, fragmentation, ecological imbalance, etc., etc. So now, actually, there are solutions, and we need to have some pragmatic solution looking forward to. So, therefore, the Minister of Environment some time ago thought about a solution for this kind of, escalating the environmental issue that have been happening. So ultimately, we are talking about the areas where there are environmentally sensitivities, and on the other hand, there are people living, there are people inhibited. So therefore, the idea was that when it comes to those areas, we have to go for co-management approach. So and also we could create area-based economic models depending on areas. The area, it can be area specific, and then so you can go for wise use of natural capital, and thereby create a win-win situation. So that further this degradation or deforestation or whatever doesn't happen. So that is why this national policy on environmentally sensitive areas came into being. So as you all know, this environmentally sensitive area policy has been almost completed. It was open for public, and then it will go to the cabinet, and then of course there'll be way forward. And in this whole process, the UNDP was right behind us cooperating with us, and also Jeff Global Environment Facility provided finances. Now, who were involved in this the whole process? Actually, it was the Ministry of Environment, and then sectoral stakeholders, especially the Ministry of Land. When it comes to Ministry of Land, the LUPPD was in forefront, and then the Ministry of Wildlife and the Forest, of course, they are the Forest Department and the Wildlife Department. They were throughout with this project. If you remember, Mr. Ranawak and Mr. Vidana Patirana, I think almost 1 year ago, somewhere there, we had a meeting in the Ministry of Environment. That is where we started this scale-up plan. Now, this the ESA project was there, but towards the end of this project, we actually also sensitizing the various issues that were happening in country, not in the best interest of the environment and the sustainable development. So I was also trying to find some tools as to how to overcome this situation in a friendly manner. So therefore, this ESA project came to rescue, and then that is how we decided on scale-up plan. And I think this project is going to be an example for the projects that have been scaled up, because most of the time these projects die down at that level. But I would say this project, I think the value of this project is actually in scaling up. And scale up, of course, this will be enumerated later by Professor Sevwandi and others, and also Dr. Jokam. In fact, by now, so far, this project has identified about over 200 ESAs, and then it's open for public to identify in their respective areas whether if there are any ESAs. So that is how it will work. And also there will be a steering committee summoned by Secretary of Environment and co-chaired by the Secretary of Environment and Secretary of Land. And the policy is very important as a tool for us to really know as to by which policies that we would be governed. And this is a co-management approach, and it is more than legal entities. We are actually relying on the good governance, and relying on looking forward, working with people, working with co-stakeholders, working with whoever. So in this policy development, other than the sectoral stakeholders, of course, there was corporate sector partners, there were, and NGOs, CBOs, and academia. They were very helpful, and this was reviewed by experts. And also the Professor Sevwandi worked as the ESA's scale-up team leader, and this project came under the division of Additional Secretary Mr. Vasantha Disanayaka, Environment Policy and Planning, and the directorate is Environment Planning and Economics, headed by Mrs. Kulani. Therefore, we believe that through cooperation among government agencies and among others, among community, we would be able to safeguard environment and also give a chance for sustainable environment, sustainable development of this country. Of course, as we all know, His Excellency has set up goals on forest cover, goals on the government has the Minister of Environment, the government, His Excellency, has set up goals on national NDCs, the net zero. So all these are coming up, and they are all these targets to be achieved. We have a lot of complementary work to be done by all agencies. So thank you very much. I hand over once again to you for proceedings. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Anil, for your insightful breakdown of what this whole policy is going to entail. I have to correct myself. This is the environmentally sensitive areas policy that is actually being underlined on this program today. So thank you once again, Dr. Jayasinha. I also have been a bit remiss. I have with me the Assistant Director of the Media Center for National Development, Dr. Ishan Abegunawardena as well, who is seated here with me. And we will both be facilitating questions later on during the Q&A session. For now, however, I would like to invite Professor Sewandi Jayakodi. She's the Senior Lecturer of the Wayamba University to kick things off by giving us an insight as to the concept of the ESA and how it came about. So Professor Sewandi, floor is all yours.
Thank you very much, distinguished guests. Good morning to everyone. And I'm glad that this opportunity is given to us to talk about environmentally sensitive areas. I have prepared a few slides to share with you all today. Let me start with those slides, which will be, we'll see when we go that way. So, as Dr. Jayasinha, Secretary to the Ministry of Environment, very correctly mentioned, environmentally sensitivity and environmentally sensitive area concept and the policy that is being discussed today has a broad meaning. And I would like to talk about it with few examples, because the moment we start talking about environment, the very first thing that comes to our mind is biodiversity. I would like to take this opportunity to talk about environment from a different angle. I would like to talk about why environment is a part and parcel of ours, and its sustenance, its survival is the survival of ours. And in order to do that, I also would like to take up a few examples. And these examples have been selected considering the approach that we have taken in order to identify environmentally sensitive areas. When we talk about environmentally sensitive areas, the approach that we used with the guidance of all the experts, all the government officials of this country, is to look at what entails as environmental sensitivity. Is it merely biodiversity? Is it just the forest? No. It has a very broad meaning, and it has a bigger meaning. What is this bigger meaning? Let me take one example to start with: water. Water, which is essential for you and me, as well as for our industries, as well as for our own survival. If we look at the water, here in Sri Lanka, we are blessed with 103 rivers. And these 103 rivers run because of one important feature. Land about 1,500 meters of this country does a secret environmental service, which is known as fog interception. Day and night, the vegetation above 1,500 intercepts the clouds, and that's why it is known as applied cloud forests. This fog interception is the main reason why we see our rivers flowing constantly. So when we look at the environmental sensitivity, one angle that we looked at is where is this land? And you can see in this map, it's a tiny area within the country. Though tiny, you can see up here, this tiny knuckles, and then the other central massif is the main reason for all these 103 rivers. And then when you look at the land use within that 1,500, about 1,500 areas, what is given in green color is the already protected areas. But you can also see in pink, a substantial proportion of that land is forested but not protected. And what is given in blue, powder blue, is all the remaining other land uses. It can be tea, it can be households, it can be anything. It can be a school ground. But every land parcel, about 1,500, has the potential to intercept the fog and to make sure that our rivers flow. When we look at environmental sensitive areas and the concept, it is looking into all these land uses. So you can see, as very clearly indicated in this thing, the other land uses and the importance of it. Here in Sri Lanka, we are no more in a situation where each and every land parcel can be protected or brought under protection because they are important. Of course, what I showed you earlier here as significant forest, yes, it has to be protected. It has to be brought under the protection either by the Department of Wildlife Conservation or Department of Forest. But what about the land uses given in green in here, like tea? If we are to protect this environmental sensitivity of these areas, what we really need is thinking beyond the normal framework and thinking about how do we work with the stakeholders. And that's a significant area. You can see area under other land uses is 269 square kilometers in here. Unless we start today interacting with these stakeholders and come to win-win solutions, we will not be thinking about our rivers flowing the way they are flowing in future. And that's what I would say environmentally sensitive area concept. And that's how we looked into that too. So from water, I'm going into something completely different: agriculture, economy, and human safety. Why agriculture, economy, and human safety? A substantial proportion of the intermediate and the dry zone of this country, if you look at, is the heart of rice production, is also the heart of our civilization. But it is also the elephant country. Human-elephant conflict, coexistence between human elephants have been discussed in various forums, and we've been looking for solutions. One of the solutions that we've been always practicing is protection, which is utterly important and essential. But if you look at the next map and the statistics, I extracted these statistics from Prithviraj and the others 2021 paper, you can see that in 44% of the country, elephants and people live in the same landscape. And where is this landscape? Is it the protected areas? No. As the map very clearly shows to you, you can see a substantial amount of elephants are living outside the protected area network. And this is environmentally sensitive. Why? It is in that landscape that we have people doing practice in their agriculture, and their livelihoods are very important. So environmental sensitive area policy allows us to think, how do we deal with these kind of landscapes? As you can see in this graph very clearly, in order to do that, we have to have new models. As Dr. Anil Jaisingh very correctly mentioned, we need new models where we work with people and think of win-win solutions. And that's very, very important. an area that you and me very well knows up here in Vilpattu National Park, and then the surrounding area, Tabove area, if you look at, you can see the protected area network given in yellow color that belongs to Forest Department. What is belonging to Wildlife Department is given in blue, blue color here. And then you can also see in green color all the other significant forest patches. While Forest Department and Wildlife Department works together in order to protect this forest, even the forest outside the protected area network, what about all the other areas? If you look at the data from Wildlife Conservation Department, collared female elephant distribution, which is given in pink, they don't have boundaries. They go everywhere. And in all these areas cannot be brought under protected area network. Then how do we do business? In order to do businesses like this, ESA provides a framework. Here between Vasgamo, Madruwaya, you can see Kalukale connectivity, Sevanapitiya connectivity, and Elakotaliya connectivity, which is essential to be managed because a large number of people are dying every day here. A large number of elephants are dying. Crop raiding is a big issue. And when you embrace a concept like environmentally sensitive area concept and its policy, government agencies, both the ministry responsible for land, ministry responsible for the environment, and ministry responsible for wildlife and forest can work with stakeholders and work out how do you manage situations like this. Unless we do these things, unless we go there, conservation and sustenance will not be an option. But moving from there, environmentally sensitive area concept is also about our biodiversity. Our biodiversity that cannot be protected merely by coming with fences of protection. Why do I mention that? Why do I mention that fences simply cannot maintain our biodiversity? Let me give you an example. Here's our protected area network. If you look at the protected area network of the country, you can see that a substantial proportion of our protected area network is in the dry zone, intermediate zone. But what about the wet zone? Why is wet zone important? If you look at what we call the other state forests that are out there, that is not under the protected area network yet, but key to the economy of this country, also key to the biodiversity of the country, you can see it still lays vulnerable, it still lays outside. But it does not mean each and every tiny dotting here can be brought under protection. We need models that will enable us to work with people and to think of how do we do that. And that's very, very important. Earlier you saw in the map, while the protected area network is mostly in the dry zone, I'm talking in terms of the biodiversity now. As you can see, I'm taking reptiles for an example. Over the last 5-10 years, most of the new discoveries of reptiles in this country, whether it is geckos, snakes, most discoveries have been done outside protected area network. And also you can see most of them are present outside the protected area network in the wet zone of the country. If you look at the reptile sensitivity index, you can see how the wet zone comes as a key area. And this is the sensitivity we need to protect because most of these species are endemic to Sri Lanka, found only in Sri Lanka. And in certain cases, they are range restricted, found only in one locality for the entire world. Our commitment is not for the nation or us, but for the world, because we are a part of CBD, Convention to Biological Diversity. We are a part of CITES Convention. So protecting the biodiversity of the country is protecting the biodiversity that belongs to the entire world. And that's why ESA policy is quite important. And finally, it's our livelihoods. These shrimp farmers of Muthupantiya in Northwestern Province, their bounty, their harvest depends on the quality of the coastal ecosystems, the quality of the seagrass beds, quality of the mangrove ecosystems, and the quality of the coastal ecosystem. Livelihoods along the coastal areas span from fisheries to aquaculture and, most importantly, to the tourism. Protecting our livelihoods is also firmly tied to ESA concept. Why? When we were doing this exercise, the scaling up activity, you can see more significant coastal systems are found in the northern and northwestern province. In terms of the beauty of the beaches, ecosystems, presence of species like dugongs, coral reefs, which are the nurseries, breeding grounds for fishermen, for the fish. So the fishing is practiced because of the presence of these ecosystems. While the Department of Wildlife Conservation in the last few years have declared large chunks of coastal areas as protected areas like great basses, little basses, Vidathalathi, which are very commendable. We also have tiny shallow reefs like Silavatura Reef up here in Mana, upon which many fishermen depend. And these little reefs, seagrass beds, need alternative management where people, government work together and take decisions how to manage them. And that's what protected ESA concept is all about. Ultimately, let me conclude by showing you this map coming from the Department of Forest. This is how our forest cover changed from 1956 to today. You can see, along with the development, the sacrifice we have made. But Sri Lanka is still an agricultural economy-based country. Our natural beauty is the reason for the tourism to flourish. It's the water that enables us to survive. And everything is interlinked to the bounties of the nature. And we need to have a commitment to protect these bounties. These bounties are both inside and outside the protected area network, and the ESA policy will enable us, while identifying the significant areas and then while protecting them, we can also identify other landscapes that got to be brought into alternative management models. So along with the people, with the consent of the people, we'll be able to manage them. So it's simply live and let live concept. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Sewandi, for your insightful thoughts. It astounds me, and it keeps astounding me, how intrinsically connected we Sri Lankans are to the very land that we live in. So, to further the discussion, I have the pleasure of inviting Mr. Robert Yukum, the resident representative of the United Nations Development Programme, or UNDP as it's popularly known, to discuss what the Sustainable Development Goals of the UN are and its agenda for 2030. Mr. Yukum, the floor is all yours.
Thank you, Honorable Secretaries of Environment, Land and Wildlife and Forest Conservation, Professor Savandi, development partner representatives, friends from the media, colleagues. Greetings, Ayubon, Vanakam, Assalamu alaikum. Very good morning to everyone. I really must say I enjoyed immensely listening to the powerful and insightful remarks of Dr. Jasinha and Professor Savandi. And now for a few remarks of my own from UNDP's perspective. Around the world, economies and the key sectors of economy like agriculture, fisheries, tourism, depend on biodiversity and ecosystem services to be productive. If one includes environmental resources and ecosystem services in national planning and GDP calculations, loss of such biodiversity and ecosystem services through environmental degradation would also mean losses to a nation's GDP, having also the negative effects on population health and food security. Ecosystems and their biodiversity also play a key role in reducing greenhouse gases. They also assist communities and nations adapt to climate change. Healthy biodiverse ecosystems play fundamental roles in determining quality economic outputs and human well-being. As in the world, as I just described, also these truisms apply to Sri Lanka. It's a well-known fact that Sri Lanka is home to rich biodiversity, and in the region has one of the highest rates of biological endemism, meaning species uniquely native to Sri Lanka. As Secretary Jasinha noted, Sri Lanka is a biodiversity hotspot, which means rich flora and fauna with life, but also that these are at high risk for destruction and face a myriad of conservation crises. Recovery from COVID-19, the pandemic we're all living through now, gives Sri Lanka and all countries an opportunity to rethink development strategies. It gives us a chance to change growth trajectories towards green societies, green economies, and therefore a chance really ultimately to find an appropriate balance between human needs, economic benefits, and the limits of the planet and our natural environment. The rethinking development, the strategies to ensure green recovery was a key recommendation, indeed a driver towards a better future in the UN Sri Lanka's July 2020 advisory paper to the government of Sri Lanka on socio-economic response and recovery to COVID-19. So what does this mean in practice? Well, in practice, much of this was described very nicely by Dr. Savandi. It means designing nature-based solutions, which can create an expanded notion of social safety nets. What's an example from my side? Maybe a healthy mountainside with trees that will reduce chances of landslides, injury to household members, and loss of assets, especially by women who may suffer disproportionately more. It means encouraging sustainable public and private partnerships at national and community levels, and it means ensuring integrated thinking and action for the well-being of people, especially the most vulnerable and marginalized populations. Now, a few words on the ESA policy. The policy being presented today facilitates all of what I've just described. The policy will support a balanced, inclusive green development with green jobs, products, and services. The ESA policy aims to ensure that communities develop economically without compromising environmental conservation. And the policy can drive forward a much larger, innovative national green development pathway if, and only if, the focus on economy, investment, capital, infrastructure, employment, skills, ensures at the same time a focus on positive social and environmental outcomes. Within UNDP's global network to support the achievement of the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, also UNDP's work here in Sri Lanka contributes in an integrated fashion toward achieving those SDGs. What does this mean? It means that the SDGs are interrelated. Restoring ecosystem services and protecting life on land, which is SDG 15, and life below water, SDG 14. Ensuring quality climate action, SDG 13, and increasing clean and renewable energy in the national and subnational energy mix, that's SDG 7. Eliminating poverty, SDG 1, increasing food security, SDG 2, and improving health and well-being, SDG 3. All of these, as also Dr. Savandi mentioned, are key to look at in a holistic manner. And UNDP's mandate is to demonstrate and help countries to put into practice how the interconnections between SDG goals can accelerate, in fact, accelerate and speed up sustainable development in Sri Lanka. In the context of today's event, examples of UNDP's efforts to facilitate green development include 3 steps. In terms of the policy itself, the ESA policy, UNDP with GF funding has proudly supported the government through the Ministry of Environment in particular to pilot test the environmentally sensitive areas concept as a new model and to develop the national policy for conserving and managing environmentally sensitive areas in Sri Lanka. Secondly, what's unique, as Dr. Jasinha mentioned, is that the country now moves from piloting to wide scale. To this end, at present, UNDP is also supporting the ministry to develop the National Environmental Action Plan, the NEAP, which is a forward-looking plan. And of course, we continue to support implementation across major thematic areas, from terrestrial and marine and freshwater ecosystems in Sri Lanka and beyond. This is part of the scale-up effort. And these, by the way, are an important contribution now during the first year of the launch of what's called the United Nations Decade on Ecosystem Restoration, which is a global call to action at a time when COVID-19 has made people the world over experience the fragility of life on Earth, but also experience what's possible if we reduce our footprint on the planet. Third, specifically in stepping beyond the pilot testing and policy development, UNDP has also supported the ministry to identify all the ESAs, all of the sensitive, environmentally sensitive areas which lie outside of the protected areas in Sri Lanka, as described by Dr. Savandi. And, having done that to help establish an enabling framework for sustainable management of these vital ecosystems, which is a first for the country. And we're very proud to be part of this process. Sri Lanka's commitment to green development is highlighted in the government's national policy framework, Vistas of Prosperity and Splendor, and its commitments are further reinforced by the somewhat recent establishment of a 46-member, I believe, 46-member presidential task force to transform Sri Lanka's economy into a green socio-economy. UNDP is currently prioritizing its own support to those national efforts on green development, working closely with many national partners, including the Ministry of Environment, Ministry of Power, Sustainable Development Council, but not limited to these, because so many government agencies have a role to play in promoting green development, including the Education Ministry in creating awareness. UNDP has helped the government to address climate change by updating its plans, which are known as Sri Lanka's nationally determined contributions to climate mitigation and adaptation, or NDCs. And at the request of the government, at present, UNDP is facilitating to bring relevant partners and strands of thinking together under a common umbrella onto maybe what you'd say a common stage to enable the pursuit of economic growth and social benefits and planet in balance with the planet. Doing so, working with all these agencies, development partners, civil society actors, and very importantly, the private sector to support and encourage stewardship and innovation and green growth. And taking note of your leadership of the Presidential Task Force, Secretary Jacinga, I and the UNDP team look forward to working with you, continuing to work with you under that leadership to actively engage the members of the PTF and of course your ministry in our joint efforts to support this agenda. And we hope to do this in the near future through UNDP's Colombo Development Dialogue series focused on green development. These are all key parts of UNDP's strategy towards transforming our world in line with Agenda 2030 for sustainable development, which is again that integrated plan of action for people, planet, and prosperity. Let me take this opportunity to thank our partners involved in this initiative and the continuous efforts from all the stakeholders involved. Particularly, I'd like to note the Ministry of Environment, as well the Ministry of Wildlife and Forest Conservation, the Ministry of Land, and many government departments at national, district, divisional level, and not to forget the academic experts and communities from across the country. It's really that the choices we make at this juncture as we're recovering from the COVID-19 hit, the economic downturn, and in the wake of time-critical climate reports, which have just emerged, the choices that we make now will determine the policies for the next decade and the future of our planet. The government of Sri Lanka's commitment is really evident through this developing and operationalizing and really raising to the highest levels the national ESA policy. It's evidence of the kind of choices we need to make and should be making as we make our way towards a greener development pathway. We are, as UNDP, a core partner to the government of Sri Lanka and its commitments to build forward better after COVID. And we want to support a generation that can make peace with nature for a more sustainable future possible. Thank you very much for your attention. Thank you. Back to the moderator.
Thank you, Mr. Chuko. Secretary of the Ministry of Wildlife and Forest Conservation, who will break down the significance of ESAs in conserving biodiversity outside of protected areas. Mr. Vidana Padrana, the floor is all yours.
Thank you very much, Secretary, all secretaries. විශේෂයෙන්ම මේ අවස්ථාවේ මම ස්තුතිවන්ත වෙනවා පරිසර අමාත්‍යාංශයේ ලේකම්තුමා ප්‍රමුඛ සියලු දෙනාටම වනජීවි සංරක්ෂණ දෙපාර්තමේන්තුවේ සහ වන සංරක්ෂණ දෙපාර්තමේන්තුව කාර්යභාරයට වඩා පහසුකම් සැලසීමේ ව්‍යාපෘතියක් වශයෙන් පරිසර සංවේදී කලාප හඳුනා ගැනීම සඳහා විශේෂ ව්‍යාපෘතියක් ආරම්භ කිරීම වෙනුවෙන් විශේෂයෙන්ම අපගේ වන සම්පත් දෙපාර්තමේන්තුවේ අපේ මැන්ඩේට් එක දේශගුණ තත්ත්වයන් මෙන්ම පස ජල සම්පත් සතුන් හා වෘක්ෂලතා සංරක්ෂණය හා රටේ සෞන්දර්යාත්මක විද්‍යාත්මක ඓතිහාසික හා සමාජ ආර්ථික අවශ්‍යතාවන් සපුරාලීම සඳහා ප්‍රශස්ත හා ප්‍රමාණවත් වන ආවරණයක් සකස් කිරීම වන දෙපාර්තමේන්තුවෙනුත් ඒ වගේම සියල්ලන්හා එක්ව වෘත්තීයමය කළමනාකරණයක් මගින් වනජීවීන්ගේ ආරක්ෂාව හා උරුමය රැකදීම අපගේ ප්‍රධාන ඉලක්කය වෙනවා. මේ සඳහා වනජීවි දෙපාර්තමේන්තුවටත් වන සංරක්ෂණ දෙපාර්තමේන්තුවටත් දැනට ලංකාවේ නීතිගත ඇති කණත් ඔස්සේ ආඥාපනත් ඔස්සේ අපි කටයුතු කරමින් පවතිනවා. ඒ කෙසේ වුවත් මේ පවතින තත්ත්වයේ තුල ලංකාවේ කෘෂිකාර්මික ආර්ථික රටාවක් පවතින පසුබිමක් තුල වන සංරක්ෂණ දෙපාර්තමේන්තුවටත් වනජීවි දෙපාර්තමේන්තුවටත් විශාල අභියෝගයක් පවතින කාල පරිච්ඡේදයක තමයි අපි කටයුතු කරන්නේ. විශේෂයෙන්ම දැනට පවතින වන ඝනත්වය 29.2 ප්‍රමාණය 30% දක්වා වැඩි කර ගැනීම සඳහා වර්තමාන රජය විසින් විශාල වැඩ කොටසක් ඒ සඳහා විශාල මුදලක් වාර්ෂික අයවැය ලේඛනයෙන් මගින් වෙන් කළා. ඒ සඳහා සූදානම් වන මොහොතකයි අපි කටයුතු කරන්නේ. ඒකම කුඩා දිවයින වුණත් අපගේ පරිසරය පද්ධතියේ පවතින විවිධත්වයේ ජෛව විවිධත්වය හා ඒ ස්වභාවික සෞන්දර්යය අපිට ලෝකයේ අන් රටවල් වලට වඩා තාමත්ම දැඩි ආකර්ෂණයක් ලබා ගැනීම සඳහා මේ පරිසර පද්ධතිය අපේ නිර්මාණය වෙලා තියෙනවා. ඒ තුළ වනජීවී දෙපාර්තමේන්තුවටත් වන සංරක්ෂණ දෙපාර්තමේන්තුවටත් දැනට පාලනය වන ඒ සංරක්ෂිත කලාප වලින් බැහැරව විශාල ප්‍රදේශයක් ඒ පරිසර කලාප විදියට සංවේදී කලාප විදියට හඳුනා ගැනීම සිදු වුණත් ඒ විධිමත්ව ලේඛනගත කළා ඒ සඳහා ආරක්ෂක වැඩපිළිවෙල මොනවද කියන එක සැලසුම් කළා ඒ සඳහා තවදුරටත් ඒවා එවැනි ප්‍රදේශ සංරක්ෂණය කළ යුතුද එහෙම නැත්නම් සංරක්ෂණය කළ නොහැකි එහෙත් ඊ타ත්ම පරිසරික සංවේදී කලාප ප්‍රජාකීය සහ අනෙකුත් රාජ්‍ය හා රාජ්‍ය නොවන සංවිධානවල සහභාගීත්වයෙන් සහයෝගයෙන් ඒවා සුරක්ෂිත කළ කෙසේද යන්න පිළිබඳව අභියෝගයකට අපි මුහුණ දීලා සිටිනවා. ඒ අභියෝගය ජය ගැනීම සඳහා UNDP ආයතනයත් පරිසර අමාත්‍යාංශයත් ඒකබද්ධව මේ ක්‍රියාත්මක කිරීමට සැලසුම් කර ඇති වැඩසටහන ඊ타ත්මත්ම කාලීන සහ වැදගත් ව්‍යාපෘතියක් බවට මට හඳුනා දෙන්න පුළුවන්. ඒ වගේම මේ ප්‍රදේශවල ජීවත් වෙන ජනතාවගේ දෛනික ජීවනෝපාය සංවර්ධනයේ ප්‍රවේශයත් ඒ වගේම ඒ ජීවනෝපාය ප්‍රවේශය ආරක්ෂා කරන ගමන්ම ඒ පරිසරික සංවේදී කලාපය ජනතාවට හිතාමත්ම හඳුන්වා දෙමින් ඔය වැදගත්කම් කියා දෙමින් සංචාරක ව්‍යාපාරයට වගේම ඒ රැක ගැනීම තුළ අනාගත පරපුරට මේ සම්පත ආරක්ෂා කර ගැනීම සහ ජනතාව සහ දුවා දරුවා පාසල් දුවා දරුවා වගේම සියලුම ජනතාවට අවබෝධයක් ලබා දීම තුළින් මේ කාර්යය සිදු කිරීමට හැකි වේවයි අපි අපේක්ෂා කරනවා. විශේෂයෙන්ම පාරිසරික සංවේදී කලාප හඳුනාගත් ගතුවන්ට පසුව අපිට පුළුවන් වනජීවි දෙපාර්තමේන්තුවත් වන සංරක්ෂණ දෙපාර්තමේන්තුවත් ඒකබද්ධව දැඩිව සංරක්ෂණය කළ යුතු ඒවා සංරක්ෂණ කලාප වශයෙන් නම් කිරීමටත් එසේ අපහසු ඊ타ත්ම පවතින ප්‍රදේශ හඳුනාගෙන ඒවා ජනතාවගේ ප්‍රජා සහභාගීත්වයේ තුලින් පරිසරික සංවේදී කලාප බවට පත් කරාට පස්සේ ජනතාවත් ඒ කෙරෙහි ඊ타ත්ම ඇල්මෙන් පරිසර හිතකාමීන් ඔවුන්ගේ හදවත තුළ ඇති කර ගැනීම තුලින් අපිට මේ පරිසර පද්ධතිය ආරක්ෂා කර ගැනීමේ වැදගත්කම උන්ට අවබෝධ කර දීමෙන් ඔවුන්ගේ ජීවනෝපාය වගේම රටේ පවතින මේ සීමිත සම්පත් ප්‍රමාණය අනාගත පරපුර වෙනුවෙන් රැකදීමේ මහඟු කාර්යය අපි සියලු දෙනාටම දායක විය හැකියි මා අදහස් කරනවා. එම නිසා මේ අවස්ථාවේදී පරිසර සංවේදී කලාප සංකල්පය ඉතාමත්ම කාලෝචිත සහ ඉතාම වැදගත් සංකල්පයක් බවට මා හඳුනා ගන්න අතර අපගේ අමාත්‍යාංශයෙන් වනජීවී සහ වන සංරක්ෂණ අමාත්‍යාංශය වශයෙන් මේ සඳහා දැක්විය හැකි උපරිම දායකත්වය ලබා දීම සඳහා අපි කටයුතු කරනවා. ඒ සඳහා අවශ්‍ය ප්‍රතිපත්තිමය රාමෝ සහ අනපන සංශෝධනයේදී අපි පරිසර අමාත්‍යාංශය සමග ඉතාමත්ම සමීප සම්බන්ධතාවයක් ආරක්ෂා ඇති කරගනිමින් මේ විද්‍යාත්මක ඓතිහාසික සමාජ ආර්ථික අවශ්‍යතාවයන් සම්පූර්ණ වන පරිදි මේ කාර්යය කිරීම සඳහා දායකත්වය ලබා දී හැකි බව මේ අවස්ථාවේ ප්‍රකාශ කරනවා. ඒ සඳහා මේ විශේෂ වේදිකාවක් සංවිධානය කරපු ජනමාධ්‍ය අමාත්‍යාංශයට මේ සඳහා දායකත්වය ලබා දෙන පරිසර අමාත්‍යාංශ අනිකුත් ඒජන්සි වලටත් මගේ කෘතවේදීත්වය මේ අවස්ථාවේදී ලබා දීමට කැමැතියි.
Thank you, Mr. Vidana Patirana, for your thoughts there. Next, we have Mr. R. Ranawaka, Secretary to the Ministry of Lands, who will give us an idea of the strategic use of lands for the development of ESS in environmental conservation and resilient communities and development. That was a mouthful. So, Mr. Ranawaka,
thank you very much. Good morning, everybody. All secretaries, Professor and Mr. Robert, UNDP representative. First of all, I would like to thank for you giving this opportunity to express my few words regarding land management. Our ministry, land ministry, has a pivotal role regarding land management. Our main objective is management of land availability in Sri Lanka. We have limited land resources. There are about 6.5 million hectares in Sri Lanka. The per capita land use is little bit more than half an acre. Department of Land Use Planning comes under our ministry. In 2007, the department has prepared a draft for the land use policy for Sri Lanka. Considering this environmental sensitivity policy plan is a part of the land use policy. There are a lot of enactments for land management. From 1800 onwards, there are more than 20 acts and ordinances regarding land management. These land management policy legitimates include policies also. We can remember that main objective of this, most of the acts is segmentation of the land for different requirements. Divisional secretaries, government agents, and other agencies need different type of requirements. Therefore, alienation for land for this type of different requirements is a very difficult task. As you know, environmental sensitivity areas aim to sustainable land use planning and practices. I think we can consider, as Mr. Vidanapatirana said, their aim is to achieve 30% of the forest cover. But in other hand, there are a lot of demand for other activities. The people need lands for their agricultural purposes, living purposes, and other development activities. Therefore, we have to find an optimum solution for this all the requirements. Our land use policy, which prepared during 2017, still has not been gazetted. Therefore, we are expecting to complete this land use policy within next year. For that purpose, we need collective assistance from all the agencies, forest and wildlife, that ministry, especially in environmental ministry, and other land representative ministries, urban development, cultural activities, tourism activities, and water resources, irrigation, like that. There are a number of ministries and departments and also government agencies are involved in these land matters. Therefore, I suggest to I have already suggested the government that we need a collective institution for coordination of these all agencies. Then only we can segment our land to these different activities. As said Dr. Jaisingh, the environmental ministry priority is to secure their environment, elimination of pollution, and improve the forest coverage. And as you had a very big program that Surakim Ganga for that environmental activities, something like that, their demand is that side. Other way, lot of development activities demanding lands. Sometimes we acquire private lands for these activities. My concern is we have this type of ad hoc planning for usage of land. That is, we have to regularize. Otherwise, we have to have a long-term plan in order to secure this land for the future development also. The one objective, one alternative is improve the productivity of the piece of land. The construction of high-rise buildings and improve the harvest productivity, something like that we have to think. Otherwise, optimum solution may not be achieved for all of us. I think Professor Sevandi said that he's very much concerned about the environmental sensitivity and that green environment. That is, we agree. But for that green environment concept, when we implement in, we have to find some alternative solutions to say that our forest coverage is be counting regarding conservative forest and other protected areas. Not only that, when we consider other developing areas, agricultural areas, there are a lot of green environment can be count as a forest coverage also. Like that, we have to do some systematic arrangement in order to do some conceptual development regarding these sectors. I think in our land management sector, now policies are very important. Policies are standard that we have to be followed, sectoral like environmental policies, agricultural policies, land policies, different types of policies we have to follow. But these should be amalgamated. Otherwise, other than collective effort, not only the policies, but also other development strategies we have to be followed. Some experience that land use planning department collected a lot of information, and survey general department, they have a lot of information regarding land usage patterns. When we consider these land use patterns, there are a lot of underutilized land. There are a lot of uncultivated lands, underdevelopment lands, and unused sensitive areas that can be improved for this environmental sensitive aspects. Therefore, I kindly invite you all to give coordination to alienation of land, all these different types of usages. When we consider land development ordinance, there are 15 segmentations they have clearly mentioned for village expansion, forest reserves, water reserves, road improvements, something like that. There are a number of segmentation mentions in the land development ordinance. In the other hand, that other land acts and ordinance now urban development act, then coastal conservation act, and environmental different acts are there. Therefore, we have to collect those all acts into a one umbrella and think about to initiate a policy for total solution. Thank you very much. Right.
Thank you, Mr. Ranabaka, for your thoughts. We're going to go into a time of questions and answers right now. We've already got a few questions that I am pleased to be able to actually give our panelists because we need to understand what's going on. This is a really big deal. And ever since the end of 2019, the leadership of this country has predicated their movement on enhancing and protecting the ecosystems and the biodiversity around us. I'll say that again. Ever since the end of 2019, our leadership, the country's leadership, has been predicated on moving the country forward in enhancing the country's biodiversity and making sure that the link between the people and its ecosystems is a strong one. So my first question will be directed to Dr. Anil Jasinger, who is the Secretary of the Ministry of Environment. Dr. Jasinger, firstly, how do you identify an ESA, and can the public nominate for an ESA?
Thank you. That's a very good question. Actually, I'm sure Professor Sevandi will add to this the technicalities of ESA identification. Basically, ESAs have been identified going by the biodiversity of that area, and then the environmental services that particular area provides, and then the disaster resilience that is being provided, but by that natural capital. So those are the basically some of the criteria that are used, and then a score system has been incorporated into this. So therefore, it's a very objective criteria system. And then, of course, that ESA can be few hectares to a bigger area. And then, as I told you earlier on, already this project has identified over 200 ESAs, but certainly we invite public. Say I live somewhere and I see that there is an environmental sensitive area which is being degraded, which is at risk. So then, of course, I can write to the steering committee in the Ministry of Environment enumerating this. Then the steering committee, National Steering Committee on ESA, will take up, and the National Steering Committee consists not only of administrators, but the experts in the field are incorporated as members of this committee. So they will thoroughly discuss, and then there will be discourse between the village and the local administrators and the steering committee. And then, of course, depending on the rationale, we could add certain more ESAs. Of course, we welcome whatever such proposals. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Jasinger. While I have you, can I just quickly add one more question to that? When will this policy become active? I'm just asking for a sort of a ballpark a timeline so that we can look forward to it.
Yeah, certainly. We will start operationalizing this ESA policy before end of this year. Now, as I told you, actually we have just closed the public hearing, and then we have to submit this to the Cabinet of Ministers, and then of course the Parliament, and then we should be able to start operationalizing before end of this year.
Thank you, Doctor. I have another question, and this is from Avanti Jayatilaka to very specially Professor Sewandi Jayakodi of the Wayamba University. Professor Sewandi, Avanti has mentioned in her question, Professor Sewandi mapped out the extensive areas outside our traditional protected areas where large extent of biodiversity resources are found. There are several additional aspects such as climate zones and disaster-prone areas that will add to these areas. If we superimpose these ES maps on development plans, we may see many areas of conflict that could undermine achieving objectives of ES unless we could ensure properly thought out guidelines which are mandated in development. Take, for example, take the plantation sector, which is the single largest land user, has no policy in place to guide plantation development in the country. Would it be possible to make ES a part of the supreme law, that is constitutional provision, rather than a cabinet decision, as this is one of the fundamental rights or need for survival of the nation? I hope you got all of that, Professor Sewandi.
It's a very comprehensive question, but very well thought question. And I want to thank Mr. Jayatilaka for raising that very important question to start with. I totally agree with what he has mentioned, and I would like to actually show this. I think that is something that will be important for us to have a look at. While Mr. Ranamaka also mentioned about this in earlier, the development. So while we look at environmental sensitivity of the country and the need for looking at integrating the environmental sensitivity, on the other hand, we are a developing country, developing nation, we need development. So the ESA approach at the moment is multi-tiered. Dr. Jasinger very clearly mentioned about how we are doing the assessment to identify. For the benefit of everyone, let me very quickly, in a gist, let you know that we, in terms of identification of ESAs, there are 3 umbrellas, I would say. Umbrella 1 is looking at the biodiversity and the ecosystem richness. Umbrella 2 is looking at the environmental services. I was talking about water. Water is just one environmental service, but there are many other environmental services. Third factor, as Mr. Avanti very clearly mentioned, is the sensitivity of the lands of this country for disaster risk reduction and for the climate change. All these 3 umbrellas, if you take them together, and then if we have a method of, if we have a way of then giving a value to each and every land parcel of this country, you will have end up with a map which will indicate you what is the environmental sensitivity of each square meter of this country, each square kilometer. But onto that, it's very, very important we look at the development too. Development that is rightfully required. But here the trade-off is how do we ensure that we go ahead with the development while maintaining the natural resources that ensure development. So combining both of them, whether it is plantation sector, whether it is agriculture sector, whether it is tourism sector, I think what we need now to ensure that this dialogue is brought in, and at the same time, along with the policy and launching of the policy, once it is approved, is the very first step. But then the mammoth task starts from there. As the Wildlife Secretary very clearly mentioned, there will be areas that can be taken to the protection. But then there will also be substantial land that got to be co-managed, where all the partners, let it be the private sector, let it be the communities, that will have to come forward and work with everyone in order to talk about the sensitivity. So for that, I think the next step is integration of the policy into national legislation. As very clearly mentioned in this concept, we've been talking about why it is important to have green cells in each development sector. Because from one side, while we are doing this, Urban Development Authority, Road Development Authority, they have a mandate to play, but their mandate will be strengthened and they can do it effectively when we have information like this in our hand. And then incorporating whatever policy initiatives into legislation is the next way forward. So Environmental Ministry, with the task force that they are planning to form, will have a journey to take. And through that journey, I think we can connect all the dots that have been working independently in taking decisions about the lands of this country. So I agree with you, and that's where we need to go forward, not ignoring the development, taking the development and the sensitivity together. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor. I've got another question here from Ravi. And well, actually, let me first get this question out of the way. I'd like to direct this question to Mr. Ranawaka, who is the Secretary of the Ministry of Lands. Sir, the question here today is, there are people who have been displaced as a result of issues that have arisen because of matters like the human-elephant conflict and things like that. So going forward, once this policy is implemented, how are you going to address the people who already have been displaced and are probably going to be displaced? And what is the alternative for resettlement, where the legal framework is concerned?
Good. Now we have that according to the Land Development Ordinance, we can give land for landless people. If some people are displaced from due to some reasons, we can find land to give them, but it is depend on the availability of land. Land with trustees of the divisional secretaries, then they have used that land to alienate landless people. In other way, if we don't have any land, we can acquire private sector land. It may be plantation sector or other private lands. Then if we if we don't have any land available in the government sector, we can find that private sector land and we can acquire with the payment of compensation. Then we can alienate that landless people.
Thank you, Mr. Ranawaka. Thank you for that. I have a question for Mr. Jukam, if you are there, sir. This is with regards to the UN SDGs, and very specially with regards to where Sri Lanka stands as a nation now bringing about this policy for the protection of environmentally sensitive areas. Where would you see the development of Sri Lanka, especially where this initiative is concerned? Where would you see us in the race if you were to compare other nations who are also in the same boat as us? Because let's face it, COVID-19 has hit every country in the world, and almost every country in the world is reeling. But for Sri Lanka to make this a priority at this point of time and still keep this as a forefront initiative in its focus, where would you rank Sri Lanka in your esteemed opinion?
Sri Lanka is, by virtue of this process and this policy, already taking the right step in the directions that you're hinting at. Difficult to compare with other countries around the world, but as you noted, and as I said earlier, you know, COVID-19 has put certain stresses on societies, both economically and socially in particular. On the other hand, the environment has benefited in many respects by the reduced consumption and production, but this has also had negative impacts on people. The policy itself, the work towards ESA puts Sri Lanka ahead of the curve, in my opinion, compared to many other countries. And complementing that is something that I spoke to earlier, which is the green development pathway. And Sri Lanka already having set up a task force, a presidential task force, to address to define and formulate that way forward is also a big step. And it's complicated because it has so many, it's very multifaceted. It's really like a new development paradigm. Countries used to talk about only GDP. Then UNDP introduced the concept of human development, which included other dimensions such as education and health in measuring national development. And as the SDGs were adopted, it became more multifaceted. And green development, in a way, is a reflection of that. It brings together a lot of the most critical sectors across the SDGs, as I said. And again, by virtue of that step towards a green economy, green development, where companies start to behave in a different way. We help the private sector to adjust its business models, where the environment is better conserved, and the ESA is a perfect example of bringing those stakeholders together. Where human beings, people benefit by getting jobs that are green jobs, and producing green products and services. So I think in this respect, despite the challenges Sri Lanka faces, being a biodiversity hotspot with risks, you can see the trajectories, as Dr. Savandi also showed, of forest cover, but there's some recovery going on. And I think Sri Lanka, its long history with the cascade water management irrigation systems, it's being an island, understands very well the importance of that green trajectory. So I think in this sense, I would say Sri Lanka is definitely ahead of the curve and potentially a leader amongst nations, not just in the sub-region, but globally.
Thank you so much for those words, Mr. Jukum. As you know, Sri Lanka we're aching for a bit of hope in a dark time like this, and that was truly a ray of hope to know that Sri Lanka is way ahead of the curve, and we're setting a trend, at least amongst our neighboring countries. I have a question from Inoka Samaravikrama, and this is with regards to, this is going to be directed to Mr. Vidana Patirana, who is the Secretary to the Ministry of Wildlife and Forest Conservation. It's a question that is based off of tourism. How is the ESA and the policy that the ESA is going to set about in a few months' time going to affect tourism in a way that is going to also preserve and upkeep our natural wildlife, our forestry? How do you see that balance panning out, sir? Mr. Vidana Patrana, can you hear me? Mr. Vidana Patrana, can you hear me? Okay, I'm going to come back to you in a bit. Let me take my next question forward to Dr. Anil Jasingha. Doctor, I have a question from Mr. Gamini Subasingha, who asks, does this policy address the activities undertaken within ESAs by the various donor-funded projects or government-funded projects? Just giving approvals for the activities by the respective ESA-owned institution will not help to conserve our ESAs. There should be independent judgments on the flora and fauna status in the ESA where the activities are undertaken. Example, water distribution network is encroaching or going through an ESA. The other query is, does this policy have a detailed plan of action to implement the policy?
Okay, thank you once again. I would say we don't have a detailed plan of action as such. This is a sort of operational steering committee. Now, the objective of this ESA scale-up project is identifying ESAs. So centrally we identify ESAs, and also peripherally public or organizations can identify ESAs. So once they are proposed, then the steering committee will work on them. And when it comes to other organizations, funded projects and all that, certainly now when this policy come into stay, I'm sure all these the development partners and other governmental, non-governmental organizations will be mindful and will know about this operational, working setup. So I'm sure they will, sort of contact us. And on the other hand, if there any project or any project is coming up in this area, certainly we will also be chipping in and the support them. Of course, there's enormous scope for projects to come by, and this policy will sort of have certain guidelines, some policy framework within which anybody can work. Thank you.
So my question is to Mr. Vidana Patirana, Ministry of Wildlife. So recently there was a circular issued by the Ministry of Wildlife which transfers other state forests. That's about 1.5 million acres of land from forest department to the divisional secretaries. Now divisional secretaries can give away these lands as grant to the various purposes for the people. So my question is, isn't there this decisions in this circular against the ESA concept, how the sustainability of these lands could be assured when it is transferred to the divisional secretaries, not when they are not with the wildlife forest department?
Actually, I think
we can hear you. We can hear you.
Sorry, actually, I can answer that question because that circular is issued by me. I think last August 6th, I have issued a circular for district secretaries and divisional secretaries regarding clarify the land development ordinance. There are 4 types of forest: conservative forest,
that reserve forest and village forest. Those forests are demarcated by the survey department and gazetted. Then other forests, in 2001, Secretary to the Ministry of Environment at that time issued a circular hand over those forests from the division secretaries to the forest department. That is wrong because nobody can change the ordinance or acts. Therefore, I clearly mention these forests, these other forests, not other forests, actually those are the other lands, belongs to the government. Lands belongs to the government which have not alienated for other organizations, forest or wildlife or Buddhist Commissioner Department or Cultural Department or Postal Conservation or if we have not assigned any lands, already belongs to the division secretaries. Now that was happened. Now division secretaries can protect those lands because from the beginning, during the government agent period, 100 years ago, from that period, government agents are securing those lands because they also government officers. Forest department also government officers. But Forest Department Act, forest or according to the Forest Act, Section 20 of the Forest Act, they have to look after those lands if anything happens against to the forest law. They have to enforce the law for that. That is there. Therefore, that is my clarification made for land administration to the division secretaries. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, sir. Mr. විධානපතිතුමාගෙන් තියෙන ප්‍රශ්නයක් පරිසර සංගීත පරිසර කලාප සඳහා වන ජාතික ප්‍රතිපත්තියක් පිළිදැක්වීමෙන් අනතුරුව සංචාරක ව්‍යාපාරය සම්බන්ධයෙන් ජෛව විවිධත්වය සහ වනජීවි සංරක්ෂණය අපිට ගොඩක් වැදගත් වෙනවා සංචාරක ව්‍යාපාරිකයන් සංචාරකයන් ආකර්ෂණය කරගන්න. ඒ සඳහා මේ කොහොමද මොන වගේ වැඩ දියුණු කරලා තියෙන වැඩපිළිවෙලක්ද ඒ සඳහා මොන වගේ රාමුවක්ද තිබෙන්නේ කියලා ඔබතුමාගෙන් අහනවා.
ඇත්තටම අපි වනජීවි දෙපාර්තමේන්තුව හා පරිසර වන සංරක්ෂණ දෙපාර්තමේන්තුව මේ දවස්වල ඉතාමත්ම ආදායම් උත්පාදනය කරන දෙපාර්තමේන්තු දෙයක් වශයෙන් රජයට සංචාරක ව්‍යාපාරයත් එක්ක සම්බන්ධ වෙලා ඉතාමත්ම අඩු ආදායම් තත්ත්වයක තමයි පවතින්නේ. මොකද විදේශීය සංචාරකයන් මෙන්ම විදේශ සංචාරකයන් සීමා වෙලා තියෙන නිසා. කෙසේ වුවත් අපි මේ කාල පරිච්ඡේදය තුළදී දේශීය සංචාරකයන්ට වගේම විදේශීය සංචාරකයන්ට ඒ වනජීවි කලාප සහ අපේ විශේෂයෙන්ම වන රක්ෂිත ප්‍රදේශවල අවශ්‍ය පහසුකම් සංවර්ධනය කිරීම සහ විශේෂ වැඩසටහන් රාශියක් අපි පවත්වාගෙන යනවා. ඔවුන්ට අවශ්‍ය යටිතල පහසුකම් ලබා දීම වගේම දැනට ඒ ප්‍රදේශවල තියෙන වන සිව්පාවන්ගේ පහසුකම් විශේෂයෙන්ම වියලි කලාපවල කාලවලදී අවශ්‍ය ජලය සහ අනිකුත් අවශ්‍යතා ආහාරමය අවශ්‍යතාවයන් මේ සපයා ගැනීම සඳහා ඒ වගේම කැලෑවල තියෙන සතුන් වනජීවීන් අපේ සාමාන්‍ය ජනතාව ජීවත් වන ප්‍රදේශවලට ඇතුළු වීම සඳහා වන ප්‍රවණතාවය අඩු කිරීම සඳහා වනයේ තුල ආරක්ෂිත මේ ජල මේ පහසුකම් ඇති කිරීම ජල ටැංකි සහ වැව් වමුණු ඒව දිනු කළා උන්ට ඒවා ධාරිතාව වැඩි කිරීම වගේම දිගු කාලීනව ඒ වනයේ තුල මෙම ඒ වනජීවීන් සාමාන්‍ය පරිසරයට ඒම වැළැක්වීම සඳහා අවශ්‍ය ආහාරමය ශාක මේ සිටුවීම සඳහා විශාල ව්‍යාපාරයක් අපි කරගෙන යනවා. විශේෂයෙන්ම ඒ ආහාරමය ශාක තුලින් අපි විශ්වාස කරනවා පරිසරයෙන් සාමාන්‍ය පරිසරයට නොවේ වනයේ තුලදීම ඒ සතුන්ගේ ආහාර අවශ්‍යතාව සම්පූර්ණ කර ගැනීම තුළ මේ ආහාර නිෂ්පාදනයට වන භූවීන්ගේ විශේෂයෙන්ම අපිට තියෙන ප්‍රධාන ප්‍රශ්න තමයි මේ ප්‍රෙලෝම් වඳුරන් සහ ඌරන් සහ අනිකුත් සතුන්ගෙන් වගාවටන හානිය අවම කිරීම සඳහා විශේෂ වැඩසටහන සංවිධානය කළා. ඒ වගේම ඊට අමතරව මම කියන්න කැමති මේ අපි ඔය පරිසර සංවේදී කලාප වගේම අපි දැනට වන දෙපාර්තමේන්තුවෙන් වන සංරක්ෂණ දෙපාර්තමේන්තුවෙන් සිදු කරගෙන යනු ලබනවා අපි පරිසර හිතකාමී ගම්මාන. ඒ කියන්නේ අපි මේ ප්‍රදේශවල වන විශාල ෆොරස්ට් එකට ආසන්නව තියෙන ජීවනෝපාය කරගෙන ඒ ජනතාවගේ ජීවනෝපාය ඒ වනය ආශ්‍රිතවම කර ගැනීම සඳහා වන ගම්මාන සංකල්පය නව රජය විසින් හඳුනාගෙන ඒ සඳහා අවශ්‍ය පහසුකම් විශේෂයෙන්ම මීමැසි පාලනය අනිකුත් පිටුල් කර්මාන්තය ආදී වගේම ඒ කෘෂි කර්මාන්තයට අදාළ වන කර්මාන්ත වගේම ඒ වනය තුළ සංචාරක ව්‍යාපාරය දියුණු කරමින් ඒ ප්‍රදේශවල ඉන්න තරුණයන්ගේ රැකියාව උත්පාදනයේ ඒ තුළම වැඩි දියුණු කර ගැනීම සඳහා විශේෂයෙන්ම ඡායාරූපකරණය වගේ දේවල් අපේ තරුණ ජනතාවට දරුවන්ට ලබා දීම තුළ ඔවුන්ගේ පරිසරයේ තියෙන සුන්දරත්වය පරිසර හිතව මේ ලෝලින්ට ලබා දෙමින් ඔවුන්ගේ ජීවනෝපාය සංවර්ධනය කිරීම සඳහා අපි විශේෂ වැඩසටහන් සකස් කරලා තියෙනවා. ඒ වගේම මේ පරිසර සංවේදී කලාප කිව්වන් පස්සේ අපි අපේ රටේ ඉන්න මේ දුවදරුවා කෙරෙහි විශේෂ අවධානයක් යොමු කරලා තියෙනවා අපේ අමාත්‍යාංශය. අපි දැනට අධ්‍යාපන අමාත්‍යාංශයත් එක්ක ජාතික අධ්‍යාපන ආයතනය සමග විශේෂ සාකච්ඡා වාර කිහිපයක් පවත්වලා මේ විශේෂ ක්ෂේත්‍රයට වන ජීවි සහ වන සංරක්ෂණ විෂය ඇතුළත් කළා. පරිසර හිතකාමී පරිසර දැනුමක් ඇති පරිසරයට ආදරය කරන දුවදරුවන්ට පොඩි කාලයේ සිටම ඒ ආකල්පමය වර්ධනය ඇති කිරීම සඳහා වූ විශේෂ වැඩසටහනක් අපි සකස් කරනවා. තව අවුරුද්දක් දෙකක් කාලය තුල ඒ පරිසර හිතකාමී විෂය මාලාව අපගේ අධ්‍යාපන ශාස්ත්‍රය තුලින් එළි දැක්වීමටත් අපේ අමාත්‍යාංශයක් වශයෙන් කටයුතු කරනවා.
Thank you so much. Next up, I have a question for Professor Sewandi. Professor, this is a two-part question. Firstly, could you please explain, this is from Anuradha Jayasinghe, could you please explain whether the coming policy accommodates rehabilitation of already degraded sensitive areas, especially those areas which are now being utilized for economic purposes, example, mining areas and activities taking place in forest buffer zones. And on that note, there are certain ESAs that are half covering and maybe not so much covering catchment areas. How does the policy work when it comes to areas of land like that?
Thank you. Let me take the second part of the question first, the the question about the catchments. When we were looking at the environmental sensitivity of land parcels of this country, as I mentioned, water was one component that we considered under environmental services. Within water, we looked into different areas. Actually, we are at the moment considering fog interception as one, running water, that is the river network of this country, the importance of the river network, the riverine area, the riparian area, that is the boundary of the rivers, which is essential for the continuous flow of the river systems. Stagnant water in this country, when we talk about stagnant water, there's two types, the reservoirs of this country and their catchments. And also we have natural willows. They are also very important. Then we are also considering about spring water. All the spring water sources of this country has been the key to agriculture in this country. So if you go to Kahala Pallakale area, I'm talking about Mio catchment zone and so forth, agriculture totally depends on spring water that comes from Kahala and Pallakale mountains. So all that have been considered in looking at the environmental sensitivity. When I say considered, for the identification, these are considered, but then you talk about the management. How do we do management? How do we ensure that these environmental services are retained, managed, while we do our day-to-day businesses. And that's where I think we are talking about how to implement the ESA at the ground level. So while at the top level, we are getting the policy dialogue going on, at the ground level, the bottom-up approach is establishing co-management along with the